How would you like to get sick? I mean really sick, like hospital level sick. You probably wouldn't. Now imagine if being sick was almost guaranteed to mean death. You definitely would not want to be sick then. In this video, I'm going to tell you about some of the deadliest diseases in human history while also ranking them from the least to most deadly. Let's start with number 10, the yellow fever. If you live in Africa or South America, you have surely heard of the yellow fever. This disease is transmitted by a tiny mosquito bite. Soon after, the victim will experience nausea, vomiting, headaches, and muscle aches. For some, their time with the yellow fever ends there, but many others enter a second, more toxic phase of the virus. In this phase, you would exhibit jaundice, a symptom in which your skin and eyes would be tinted yellow, earning the virus its moniker, yellow fever. Other symptoms would include bleeding from the mouth, nose, eyes, and extreme abdominal pain. Most people endure this phase for over a week before dying. And by most people, I mean more than 40,000 people every year who are tortured to the very end by the symptoms of yellow fever. Moving on to number 9, we have dengue. Similar to yellow fever, one could contract dengue through a mosquito bite in tropical areas of the world. And despite extreme prevention methods, this virus still terrorizes many tropical countries. Once you were bitten by an infected mosquito, its saliva would transmit the disease to you, therefore turning you into the virus's new host. High fever, rashes, bone aches, and pain behind your eyes would all be byproducts of this new partnership. While some people are able to pull through and get over the disease within a week of contracting it, tens of thousands are not so lucky. The next stage of the infection is dengue shock syndrome, in which you will find blood in your urine and notice bruises under your skin. The bruises are actually your blood vessels becoming damaged and leaking, and at this point, you pretty much have one foot in the grave. At that stage, you will most likely die from platelets forming in your bloodstream, which will cause organ failure. Next up at number 8 is Ebola. Ebola is what's known as a hemorrhagic fever virus, and similar to dengue and yellow fever, it causes huge problems with your blood vessels. Ebola regularly causes inflammation and severe tissue damage to its victims, along with the regular symptoms that come with hemorrhagic viruses. The way you get Ebola is from direct contact with an infected person or an animal's bodily fluids. It can really be anything from blood to saliva, so as long as you stay away from any of that stuff, you should be golden. But if you can't, you might have to deal with organ failure, seizures, or your brain swelling. In the number 7 spot, we have tuberculosis. If you've spent any time watching TV in the past 30 years, you have most likely heard about tuberculosis, but didn't really care. Tuberculosis takes the lives of more than 1 million people every year, and it's not just old people like those ads on TV say. Tuberculosis bacteria enters the lungs through airborne particles and then slowly starts to infect you. From there, the bacteria will form lesions or pores on any organ it touches on the inside of your body. 9 times out of 10, this leads to these pores severing the lining on the inside of your lung, meaning that air and fluid will leak out, rendering you unable to breathe. If that doesn't kill you, then the internal bleeding from your airways or really any other symptom probably will. It's a good thing that it's quite difficult to contract the disease to begin with, unless of course your immune system is weak. At number 6 is the Spanish flu. The Spanish flu pandemic was around in 1918. And over its 2-year tenure, it claimed the lives of more than 30 million people. The United States lost 675,000 people to the Spanish flu in 1918. That's more casualties than World War I, World War II, the Korean War, and the Vietnam War combined. The disease was airborne and was transmitted by coughing, sneezing, and other things of that nature, meaning it did not take much time at all for it to go global. The disease started like many others, with a cough, fever, headache, and symptoms of fatigue. Not anything crazy. However, the difference between the Spanish flu and other viruses is that the Spanish flu would ravage the body's lungs. Because of this new trait the virus exhibited, combined with the tight and unsanitary living conditions during World War I, it made it very easy for the Spanish flu to take the lives of millions of people. Now, as we move on to number 5, we're going back in time to a dark chapter in history known as the Black Plague. This wasn't just your run-of-the-mill disease. If you caught it, chances were you were in for a bad time. Now, you might have read about it in history books, but for those who haven't, it wreaked havoc in the 14th century, causing widespread suffering and death. At first, you might mistake the symptoms for a common fever. Easy to dismiss, right? But as the days pass, the plague slowly takes over your entire body and the torture gets worse. The worst symptom of them all is what earned this plague its name, the Black Death. Your lymph nodes that are found throughout the body, mainly in the neck, would swell to sizes bigger than a golf ball and exhibit a truly horrifying black color, a telltale sign that your time on the planet was almost up. Your body would endure excruciating pain, feeling the life drain out of you as the infection infiltrates your bloodstream. The agony would have been relentless during the time you had the plague, and as the infection spread throughout your body, it only took a mere 3 days for a person to go from being completely fine to, well, dying. The Black Plague didn't just claim lives, it left a haunting mark on history, killing almost 60% of Europe's population, which at the time was an estimated 25 to 50 million people. In the number 4 spot is a rather famous disease known as smallpox. While the disease has been mostly eradicated now, it's estimated that in the 19th century it claimed the lives of over 300 million people, even though the global population back then was an eighth of what it is today. If you were unlucky enough to be alive sometime in the 1700s, you would have been bearing witness to smallpox in its prime, killing millions yearly. The pain would start as your body would be covered in pus-filled sores, and as each of them would pop, they would indiscriminately blister, leaving you with, well, not a fun time. While the body suffers on the outside, it's also suffering on the inside, as most endure pneumonia and eventually die from heart failure when your blood vessels rupture. I'm pretty glad we got rid of that one. Now that we've reached number 3, there's something I gotta tell you about these next 3 diseases. If you're somehow unlucky enough to contract any of them, you're basically guaranteed to die. So from here on out, these are ranked less on how deadly they are, but more on how terrible your precious time left on Earth will be. With that being said, here is number 3, rabies. You've probably heard about rabies before when talking about animals, but you most likely have never heard of anyone you know having rabies, and that's for a good reason. Humans have spent centuries eradicating rabies so that we don't really have to deal with it, but for the unlucky few that do contract the disease, it's bad. Like really bad. To start off, you'll most likely feel fatigued, have a fever, or maybe even have a headache. But after those symptoms persist for a day or two, a few more will develop. During those initial few days where your symptoms start to show up, you wouldn't even think that you had rabies, and unfortunately for you, that was your window. From here on out, the only thing you'll be able to do is pray. After those initial few days, you'll start to hallucinate, you won't be able to sleep, and most people will exhibit extreme aggression. But those are nothing compared to what I think is the worst symptom of them all, hydrophobia. Rabies patients with hydrophobia have described having a super intense thirst for water, but any attempt to drink water causes serious muscle spasms. Eventually, after 2 to 10 days, the virus will spread throughout the central nervous system, where you'll die from your spinal cord and brain swelling. But if you think that's a long, painful death, that's nothing compared to what's next. At number 2, we have Leishmaniasis. It's one of those diseases that doesn't make it to the headlines often, but when it does, it's a nightmare. Imagine this. You're somewhere in Africa, Asia, or the Americas. You're enjoying your time on the beach just to get bitten by a little sandfly. One of these tiny, almost invisible creatures would inject a parasite into your bloodstream, and that's where the hell begins. The bite might just seem like any other bug bite, but as the days pass, a sore develops at the site of the bite, and from there, things escalate. The parasite starts spreading, affecting your skin, mucous membranes, and internal organs in severe cases. In its visceral form, it will attack your internal organs, enlarging the spleen and liver. Left untreated, there's a 95% chance you die. But the real issue is having a doctor step in time to save your life. Next time, you might want to take that bug bite a bit more seriously, because every year, about 20,000 people don't. Finally, in the number 1 spot, we have one of the worst diseases of all time. Stay with me here, alright? Its official name is Bovine Spongiform Encephalopathy, or mad cow disease. It most commonly affects, well, cows, and is caused by a mutated protein that carries a disease called a prion. In cows, the disease usually causes them to act nervous or aggressive, which isn't anything too crazy. That all isn't too bad, but the big problems come from when humans contract the disease, not cows. The real horror of mad cow disease is the incubation period, which, if you're really unlucky, can take 10 years for symptoms to show. This means that you could contract this disease at any point in your life, and no matter what, you will eventually drop dead from it. Years after you contract mad cow disease and symptoms begin to show themselves, a few things will start to happen. When you get this disease, you'll begin to lose control over your own body, as your brain slowly deteriorates with memory loss and disappearing brain tissue. The infected also exhibit motor problems as you become unable to control your own limbs. Eventually, after about a year or so, most people with the disease die from complications like lung failure, cardiac issues, or other infections, as your body becomes susceptible to a plethora of other issues when it's weakened by mad cow disease. Talk about a long, painful death. Now, in my opinion, these are easily some of the worst diseases in human history. But if you think there are some that I missed, drop a comment and let me know what they are. I'd love to see what you guys think. Since this is only my first video, unfortunately, I don't have any more for you to watch. So if you want to hear more from me, subscribe and you'll know when I tell the next true story.